Ben Pearson, the Roser Tracker here, and today we're going to talk to you about one of the biggest questions in spaceflight. And that question is, where is Snoopy? Which Snoopy are we talking about? This one? No, we're talking about this one, the Apollo 10 lunar module. You see, each one of the Apollo spacecraft, they nicknamed their capsule, and they were done a number of things. It's fairly well known that the Apollo 11 was the Eagle, and the Eagle has landed, it's there. Well, they had a little bit more fun with some of the early ones, and this one, Apollo 10, chose to name the command module Charlie Brown and the lunar module Snoopy. Thus, Snoopy became the first cartoon to land on the moon, as we'll get there in a moment. Apollo 10 was the dress rehearsal for the landing on the moon. It had an Apollo capsule that was still just a little bit too heavy. It probably could have landed on the surface of the moon, but it had a little bit of extra mass, and as a result, it would not have guaranteed the safety margin required to get the astronauts home safely, and thus they opted not to. They also took a little bit of fuel out of it, and the rumor has been for some time that that was done to prevent the astronauts from landing on the moon, even though they weren't supposed to be landing there. But in reality, it was done to better simulate the lunar return trajectory that they would be faced with when you're actually launching humans from the surface of the moon. So the descent stage was more or less fully fueled. The astronauts entered in, 2 astronauts like would land on the moon, and they came within about 6 kilometers of the surface. Now they were still moving really, really fast, but they were able to look down out of their windows and see boulders. Just imagine how close they were. 6 kilometers. That's not even as far as airplanes fly above the Earth. So they were pretty close. And then they took off. They left the descent stage, which crash landed at some unknown time and place into the surface of the moon. Happened about a month later, and they continued on towards the command module, docked with it, and returned back to Earth. Now, because the lunar module didn't actually land on the surface of the moon, it still had a lot of fuel left. And they wanted to really see how far they could push it. So after the astronauts left and they had boarded back, it separated away from the command module and then fired its engines one last time to bring it onto a better trajectory, to a heliocentric orbit, because they really wanted to see how much fuel it could burn. And it kept burning for long enough that it did succeed in entering a heliocentric orbit. On board was a flag from every one of the states in the United States, plus the United States flag itself. Thus, there is a flag that is in deep space for every state. There's some other interesting things. This is the only time a vehicle that has had humans on board in space has been sent off into deep space. That never has happened before. And this is the only flown Apollo ascent stage that is still in existence. The 6 descent stages are all left on the surface of the moon from the 6 Apollo missions that were successful. Each one of those ascent modules crashed into the moon. We have some ascent stages that were not flown, such as the one that's in the Smithsonian Museum. But we also had 2 that crashed into Earth, from Apollo's 9 that never left Earth orbit, and 13 that was unsuccessful but managed to save the astronauts. But Apollo 10 is still out there somewhere, and it's probably considered the most valuable spaceflight artifact that we don't really know where it is. Now, the ground controllers were able to still contact Snoopy for some time after, for about 5 days. In fact, the astronauts even relayed a little bit of information about this as they did their final broadcast when they were about to enter Earth's atmosphere about 5 hours before they touched down. But how well do we really know where is Snoopy? Using this 5 days of data in 2011, NASA took it and tried to predict its future out as far as they could. Now, it wasn't exactly precise. They only had 5 days of data, but this was 5 high-quality days of data. With Starman, we had about 6 hours of high-quality data, because when you can get two-way radio communication, you do better than you do with mostly visual observations like Starman was done. So these 5 days allowed us to predict it out. And also, it's not going to pass near any planets other than Earth periodically. And so we're able to get a pretty good idea of where it is. So, where is Snoopy? Well, I created a website using the data that Horizons published from this 2011, and I propagated it forward, and you can see where it is. It's roughly on the other side of the sun from where Earth is right now. This is, of course, assuming that the data we have is correct. Astronomers have tried to find it since then, and they haven't really been successful, so we don't really know, but they only have an opportunity when it passes close to Earth. And that happened in 1969, towards the end of the year, in 1984, and again in 2011. Hopefully someday they'll find it. And if we find it, there's a lot of interest to capture it somehow and bring it home, because as I said, this is probably the most valuable space artifact that's out there. Now, the study that they did in 2011 didn't take into account the non-gravitational effects, but just for comparison, I compared it to the Tesla Roadster, and they're, broadly speaking, the same size and the same mass. And so I figure it's pretty likely that it has a pretty similar non-gravitational effect that the Tesla Roadster did. So I manually plugged in that value, and it came out to something that was almost identical in terms of its position with this non-gravitational acceleration. I'm like, oh, that's great. Just for the fun of it, I multiplied it by a factor of 10, plugged it in again, came out with almost identical results. Fantastic. Just to make sure I was doing everything right, I put 100 times more, and when I put 100 times more, it did show some pretty drastically different results. But the good news is it's not really very likely to be that high. So if we keep an eye out when it's supposed to be close to Earth, there's a pretty good chance we'll see it. And if we see it, then there's a pretty good chance that someday somebody's going to want to bring it back to Earth. What would you do with Snoopy if you had access to it, if you were able to capture it back and do whatever you wanted with it? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Let me know whatever questions or comments you guys have about this or anything else space exploration related. And until next time, keep on tracking. Take care.